Hi, everyone. Imagine your body's operating system suddenly crashes. One day you're running at full capacity, and the next, even standing just for 1 minute, feels like trying to reboot an ancient computer that only has dial up. Not exactly the upgrade that anyone's looking for, right? That's what happened to my guest today. But instead of accepting that error message, he rewired his OS from fear to an OS of trust, and it completely turned his life around. If you're a longtime watcher or listener, welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Raelan Agle. Here, we explore inspiring recovery stories from conditions like ME/CFS and long COVID. And these aren't just stories, they're roadmaps of what works, what doesn't work, and how to find hope, even when it feels like all the wires are crossed. Today, I am thrilled to introduce Simon Pimenta. He's joining us over in London in the UK. Oh my goodness, you're going to absolutely love Simon. Back in 1997, Simon's health crashed after years of a high-stress, demanding job, and his life shrank to sleeping 18 hours a day. Walking felt impossible, and nothing he tried seemed to work. Until he discovered, finally, what did. Now, fully recovered, Simon will break down the tools and strategies that helped him go from survival mode to absolutely thriving, so you can see what might work for you too. So let's dive in. Simon, so incredible to have you here. Thanks for doing this.
You are very welcome. It's great to be here. And, I'm sure lots of people have said this, but really appreciate everything you're doing.
Well, I really appreciate you being here and sharing your journey with people. And what a journey it has been. I only even know sort of high level pieces of it. So I don't know where you want to start, but take us back. How did this all start for you?
Yeah, well, so actually, it was interesting thinking about chatting to you today. I suddenly remembered that about 12 years before I went off with ME/CFS, I got glandular fever. And at the time I was working, doing a student placement, and I was working at a health education department. I also had a job in the evening, and I realized basically I was pushing the boat out too much. I burned out, and I really wanted to go to America to work on a summer camp for a second year. And so I was really, I've got to get well for that. And I did recover from that. And so what happened is, in terms of ME/CFS, in 1997, I went off sick with kind of flu-like symptoms. I remember being at a friend's house and just got a bit cold. And I probably spent too long sitting there and not saying anything before I finally said, actually, I'm a bit cold. Could I have an extra jumper? And by that time, I'd got a chill and I felt feverish. But in truth, that was the straw of the camel's back, because for a period of 2 or 3 years before that, I'd taken on the job of a director of a housing trust, working with men with mental health problems. And I really loved working with the clients, but I got more involved in management. And on reflection, that wasn't my forte. And, my health deteriorated over a period of 2 or 3 years. And I went from being someone who was very physically active, cycling 7 miles to work, playing football, cycling to my girlfriend's, cycling home. I was leading a very active life, playing tennis, playing football, swimming, going to the gym. And I can remember at one point in the summer before I went off sick, I went to the gym one evening, and when I got home, my girlfriend and her sister were sitting in the garden, and it was a hot evening, and I felt cold. And I thought, this is very strange, because, it's a really nice warm evening. And it's almost like my body just wasn't working properly. But as I say, in kind of November 97, I went off sick, and I thought, okay, I've got flu. I maybe need to take a week off and then I'll be fine. I tried to go back to work a few times. And then I just got to the point where I thought, actually, I can't really go back to work until I'm well enough. And that turned into 8, 9 years. And initially I was bedbound. I was sleeping 3 hours in the morning, having some food, sleeping in the afternoon, having some food, sleeping in the evening, then going to bed. And so I was literally 18 hours of the day, I was asleep in bed. And, I just couldn't do anything other than the basics. And, I could just about eat. My digestive system wasn't working properly. So even though I was eating loads of food, I was probably eating double what I eat now. I was still hungry all the time. Eventually, I was referred to King's College Hospital, which is infamous because that's where Professor Simon Wesley works, and he's kind of quite well known in the ME community as being someone who said quite a lot of unhelpful things about people with ME. So it's very controversial. But the doctor who I saw was very nice. I did ask questions. Look, could there be issues with leaky gut? Because I'd seen a doctor who was trained in nutritional medicine. He said I had leaky gut syndrome, where the food is getting into your digestive system, getting out of your digestive system into your bloodstream, and that means you get these sugar spikes, and then the pancreas kicks in to lower your blood sugar, and then I would crash. I'd literally eat food and feel totally exhausted. And they said, oh, no, we haven't got any evidence that it's anything to do with that. And I thought that was a bit strange because they hadn't actually asked me any questions that might elicit information about that. So, they offered me two things. One was Prozac, and the second was cognitive behavioral therapy. Because I knew a bit about Prozac, because I'd read the research on it, I decided not to opt for that. I didn't feel like it was a solution. I felt it was more like a sticking plaster. But I did cognitive behavioral therapy. I worked with two very nice psychologists. It was very interesting, and they kept saying to me, you need to deal with your stress, but I don't really feel like I got any tools to help me deal with my stress. And I'd done lots of stress management training. I'd trained as a counselor because I was a manager. I'd been offered training in stress management, but none of those tools that I had really helped me address the stress. So I kind of started looking at other approaches. As I say, I saw this doctor who's trained in nutritional medicine. He diagnosed candida, leaky gut, and adrenal fatigue. He put me on protocols to help those things, and they did help to some extent, but I still wasn't well. And he was saying to me, I just don't get it. Usually when people follow these protocols, they get well. I actually met up with him some years later, and I got in touch with him and said, look, you were wondering why I wasn't getting well. I think I know the answer to that. If you like, I'm happy to meet you for lunch. We went to a very nice restaurant, and I kind of shared what I'd learned about what had stopped me from recovering. But before I got to that, I still tried I'm sure you've heard this many times, tried lots of different things to try and get better. I saw a nutritionist, I saw a herbalist, I tried acupuncture, I tried Chinese herbs, which smelled out of the house and didn't taste great, but I didn't mind. I thought if it's going to help me, I'll do it. I even tried colonic irrigation. So I was very desperate, like many people are, to try things to try and get better. Some things helped a bit. I think taking certain supplements did help, but nothing really got me above the line. So life was still very limited. I remember going on holiday with a friend 8 years after I first got sick, and I was still very fragile. If I chatted for too long, for 15 minutes too long, I ended up having to rest in bed feeling totally exhausted. So in 2005, I did the lightning process, and that was an important piece of the jigsaw, because it was the first time I really understood why I wasn't getting well. And go on.
I was saying, I didn't even know it was around in 2005.
Yeah. Phil started it I think around 2000.
Okay.
So, I was kind of one of the early people to take it. And one of the things that I found super helpful is that it helped me understand that some of my stress responses were subconscious. I didn't even realize I was doing them. And I learned how to spot those subconscious responses. And, once you're aware of responses that are triggering the stress response, you can start to do something about it. And I think the other key thing I really learned is that, I understood at some level that stress wasn't good, but it really helped me understand that stress can be affecting you in a number of different ways that are really impacting your scope for recovery. So I started to understand that, for instance, when we're in stress, the body stops producing and storing energy. So you're using up energy and you're not replacing it. And it's a bit, like getting overdrawn at the bank. You get paid a penalty charge. And, I kind of understood that, if you go into, I call it an energy overdraft, then it takes more resources to create a unit of energy than if you're still in the black. I also understood that, it was affecting my digestive system. And that was like a light bulb moment for me, because my digestive system just wasn't working. As I said, I was literally eating twice as much food as I eat now. And I was still waking up in the night hungry and having to eat. It also affects your immune system. Your immune system is suppressed, so it's not able to deal with viruses, etc. It affects your thinking. You tend to be more reactive rather than creative and in problem solving. And that explained to me why, when I did have crashes, I was very emotional and reactive, and, I'd be catastrophizing, chastising myself rather than just saying, okay, I've overdone it. I'm human. We all make mistakes. I've still got something to learn here, and I can be compassionate towards myself. So that was an important piece of the jigsaw. And just learning how to spot the unhelpful responses and respond in a more useful way started to make a difference. And people noticed the difference in me. I remember going to a wedding and being able to, party all day and all night and still feel okay the next day. And, that was really the start of things. And it did get me to the point where I was able to, I always knew that whatever helped me, I would train in that. So I trained with Phil. I became a lightning process practitioner. I think I was always still interested in, one of the things you learn with that kind of brain training approach is if you notice an unhelpful response, you just say stop to it. And you kind of think about, do I want to carry on that response, or do I want to do something more useful? Because I was trained as a counselor, I was curious. I was wanting to know, well, actually, what is that response about? So, for instance, if I am generating, I'll give you an example. Actually, I remember one time when I was working, I posted something on social media, and someone responded in quite an aggressive way, saying I was wrong, and what I was talking rubbish, and what I was saying was harmful. And what I noticed is that I had this big reaction. I felt very kind of wound up and stressed by their response. And so I was like, okay, why? Why is this? Why am I having this big response? And it's only after a little while I thought, actually, at some level, and it's not necessarily conscious, when this person is criticizing me, there's a part of me that is saying, I'm bad and wrong. And when I realized that, I thought, that's not true. Even if someone disagrees with me, even if I've said something that is questionable, that doesn't make me bad or wrong. It just, and I'm happy to have a conversation with people and say, look, tell me more about what you think. Actually, I don't see things in the same way, or I might agree with someone. We might differ, but, that's a very different response to, me instantly feeling I'm bad or wrong as a person. And once I understood that I had that belief, I was able to let go of that belief. And I suppose that's interesting for me, because sometimes I hear people say, you can't regulate your nervous system via the mind. Actually, I identified an unhelpful belief and I let go of that belief. And that had a massive impact on my nervous system. It was like instantly, I felt calm, I felt regulated. And since then, I've, and I'm not saying I won't get triggered by someone, criticizing me on social media, but I feel much more relaxed about people challenging me. You may have your own experience of that, but now if someone's kind of combative, I'm like, yeah, I'm interested in your perspective, but to be honest, I'm not really going to engage with anyone who's being disrespectful. So that was like, part of my journey is actually I wanted to understand more about those responses that were affecting my nervous system. And what I was learning is that actually our nervous system is a really useful guide to what feels good, what doesn't feel good. And, this is something Claire Caldwell talks about. I know you've interviewed her. If something feels good, it's the thinking brain ideally will say, oh, I should do more of that in the right amount. If something doesn't feel good, then it's really useful for us to get curious about what is it, what's going on here that means I'm having this reaction to this person or to this event. And learning to make sense of that has been very liberating to me because it's made me realize that I don't have to stay in that dysregulated state. I can actually understand why that, reaction has happened. I can make sense of it. And it might be that I need to shift my thinking.
Simon, I bet you a lot of people listening to your story that have been on this journey for a long time, I'm just envisioning a lot of heads nodding because as you're speaking, I'm thinking, oh, I remember that. Oh, I remember being told that. Like the colonics, and it seemed like years ago we were all told we had candida overgrowth and adrenal fatigue and leaky gut syndrome. And for me, and I became obsessed with trying to fix these things. I'm not sure that any of those things were really the answer. Not saying that they're not real things and people shouldn't pay attention to them, but it's just interesting how our perspectives over time have changed. And I'm fascinated that you have to be one of the first people that started piecing together the nervous system component and thoughts and stress and emotions. So yeah, it's just fascinating that you were able to be this detective for yourself in the moment and think like, I'm going to figure this out.
Yeah, and actually it's really interesting you say that because I can remember when I first got sick, I joined an ME group, a local group, and at the time the trendy thing was adrenal fatigue and everyone was doing this Dr. Posner's protocol. And, it's like when I was told those things, you have candida, you have leaky gut, adrenal fatigue, and I looked into them. And it kind of was a piece of the jigsaw. It made sense, but following the protocols helped to a degree, but they still didn't get me well. And so that's where I did start getting more curious. And as I say, I was trained as a counselor, so I knew about, the power of our emotions. But I remember actually one of my clients saying, oh, you need to read this book by Kyle Davies, who I know you've interviewed. And one of the things he talked about, which I'd heard before, but the penny hadn't dropped, he talked about the difference between emotions and feelings. And in the Mind Body Reconnect, Claire Caldwell talks about authentic emotions being our instantaneous response. So, if you open the front door and there's a hungry tiger licking its lips, looking at you, you're going to have an emotional body response. And that happens more quickly than your thinking brain saying, oh, crap, there's a hungry tiger wanting to eat me. And so him explaining that difference, was a kind of bit of a light bulb moment, because what I started to understand was that I would have an emotion. Let's say if I was experiencing a symptom, I might feel upset, I might feel frustrated. But my tendency wasn't to just sit with that emotion and process it, make sense of it. What I would do is I'd go into my head and I would either chastise myself, I'd catastrophize, I'd ruminate, or I'd then move into a behavior of distraction. How can I distract myself from this upsetting feeling in my body? And I would tend to do things like watch movies, often action movies. And that would just stimulate my system even more. And I'd go to bed feeling more exhausted, because one of the things I realized is that, I, like many people with ME/CFS fibromyalgia, did have the trait of being a highly sensitive person. So if I watch, for instance, an action movie, it really, would stimulate my system, and I would go to bed feeling wired. I'd sometimes have to go for a walk because I watched some Tarantino movie that really, wired me up. And so I'd have the energy to go out for a walk for half an hour at 11 o'clock at night, just to kind of calm myself down. And so learning to say, okay, I'm feeling this emotion, I'm feeling this sensation. I don't have to go into my head. I don't have to ruminate, oh, why did I overdo it? Why, I'm such an idiot because I've done this so many times, I've overdone it. I could just sit with that emotion. Okay, I'm feeling upset, I'm feeling frustrated. Okay, what do I need? Well, maybe I need to be a bit compassionate towards myself. Maybe I can recognize that, yeah, okay, maybe I have made this mistake 1,000 times of having a bit of energy, overdoing it. But what that means is I'm not yet enlightened. Okay, join the club. It's like, who is? It's like, I've still got something to learn here. Can I be, what's the word? Humble enough to recognize that I haven't got it all worked out. And so by doing that, I was able to say, well, actually, what do I need right now? I could go and watch a movie and distract myself, or maybe I need to kind of just do some gentle stretching or do some journaling. Maybe I could do a bit of qigong. Maybe I could phone a friend. And one of the things, and I'm not saying this to be kind of virtuous, but one of the things I adopted as a strategy is, when I was feeling really crap, I would think of, well, who do I know who's probably feeling even more crap than me? And, I knew a few people in my little ME circle. And so I'd either give them a call or send them a text. And, it was a way of just feeling a little bit better about myself. And I remember, I don't know if you've watched the film Patch Adams with Robin Williams. If you haven't, it's a great movie. But one of the things, it's a true story about a guy who took himself to a psychiatric hospital because he was suicidal. And one of the things he discovered is that when he was helping someone else, he felt better about himself. And so that was a little strategy that I developed. So rather than going into those old patterns that weren't very constructive and ended up me digging myself deeper into a hole, I started to explore other strategies. And where the kind of brain training neuroplasticity comes in is the more that I practice those responses. Oh, I'm feeling some symptom or emotion. I don't need to run away from it. I can stay with it. I can identify what I need. I can take some little action steps that are more resourceful. Then that started, again, supporting my nervous system regulation.
I think I'm going to I still have something to learn here. I don't know, embroidered on a pillow or a sign on my wall. I think that's brilliant. It's the perfect way in these moments that we all have, the thousands we all have, where the default is often to either shove it away and pretend it's not happening, or just to start being really hard on yourself. So with this, you're acknowledging, like, okay, this isn't optimal. Noted. Like, we're not pretending it's not there or not happening, but it's also so compassionate and like more like curiosity. Like, oh, I've still got something to learn here. I think that is a game-changing approach. I absolutely, I love it.
Yeah, and again, this is something that Claire reinforced, that we need to be curious, we need to be compassionate, and we need to think about what constructive action can we take. And it can be really small things. So sometimes I remember a couple of years ago feeling really fluey, feeling really rough, but I just kind of felt I need to do something nice. And so I just thought, actually, I'm going to just play the guitar for 5 minutes. And actually, it might seem like a really little thing, but it just made a whole world of difference. Because when, and I'm learning the piano at the moment, it's the same thing. It's like sometimes even when I still have times where I kind of push myself too much. My mum has moved into a nursing home, and over Christmas I was visiting her every day. And I realized, oh, actually, I'm kind of doing an old pattern here. I'm kind of giving 120%, where maybe giving 80, 90% is enough. And I said to my mum, actually, I'm realizing I'm staying a bit too long. And by the time I'm getting to bed, I'm kind of quite tired. And she was like, go earlier. You don't have to stay for so many hours. I was staying with her for like 3 or 4 hours, and she was like, come for a couple of hours. And, and so I was like, oh my God, I'm still having to learn, because, over the Christmas period, again, I was kind of feeling quite tired. And it was because I was just pushing myself, and it was well-intentioned. But it was just like, okay, I've still got something to learn here. And so, even this week, I've got a friend staying with me. I was making a bed, an IKEA bed, which took about 3 hours. And so every night about 8:30, I thought, right, I'll make a bit of the bed. I'll only do it for about half an hour, but it would end up being an hour. And then thinking, no, that was too long. I probably could have done with stopping at 9 o'clock, going and have a bath, going and playing the piano. And that's a way of just, declimatizing from the day. So I'm still learning. Life is really good. And I posted in my Facebook group, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather. And she said, oh yeah, that's what happens. And I said, well, actually, the difference is now, when I had ME CFS, if I overdid it, that would be the next week or 2 weeks gone. Whereas now it's like, okay, I just need a few early nights. I need to just make sure I go back to my protocols, getting enough exercise, having proper breaks, not working on anything for too long without having a break, which is an old pattern. And just by doing that stuff, it's going to get me back on track.
So if you were to summarize what you think are the biggest things that got you to where you are right now, this removal of symptoms, the level of recovery, what have been the key players, the most impactful things?
Yeah. So number one is really just understanding how, number one, stress affects us. And that it was those things I mentioned, how it's affecting our energy, our thinking, our digestion, our sleep, and our immune system. But also understanding that the body, brain, and mind can activate the stress response. And the body, brain, and mind, and I have to think about the order I'm saying those things in, because I think it's important, because I think our body, registers things. Our brain is interpreting, for instance, oh, there's a tiger there. Our body registers it, and then it's our mind that kind of kicks in and responds in ways that are either useful or unhelpful. And learning that I can influence my healing by, those strategies that I've shared, by tuning into the emotions rather than running away from them. And that also meant that I had to kind of build my window of tolerance of being with discomfort, being with uncomfortable sensations. Because literally there were times, and I'm sure other people relate to this, where having a symptom was very upsetting. And that was partly because of what I was doing in my head. I was saying to myself, oh, I've overdone it again. I'm never going to get well. That wasn't necessarily a conscious thing. It was often a subconscious response. And once I understood that that was kind of what I was saying to myself, I was able to say, well, actually, that's not true. I've overdone it many times. I've gone into a setback, but I have come out of it. And I need to remind myself of that when I'm in the setback. And as I say, it's easy to not do that, because when we're in that stress mode, we're not doing the clever, creative thinking. And so that's where the brain training comes in. If I keep saying to myself, yeah, I'm in a setback, but it's okay, my body will recover, after a while, that starts to become a default response. To the point where, now if I experience some symptoms, like I had flu-type symptoms a while back, it's okay. I know I'm going to come out of this, and I'm going to be patient. I'm not going to put any time scale on it. I remember when I started doing the Mind Body Reconnect training like a year ago in October, I kind of got flu-like symptoms. And the difference was I was completely relaxed about it. I was like, I'm going to come out of this. I'm just going to do what I need to do. There were times when, it was a working day and I just thought, actually, I haven't got a client this afternoon. I'm going to have a siesta. And when I had Emmy, I would have struggled to have done that because I'd have thought I should be, brain training or whatever. And I was just like, no, actually, I feel like that's what my body needs right now. And I was able to discern, actually, you know what? I've been at home for a couple of weeks. It's time to go out. So I remember going out to a bar in Soho where the cool people hang out. And I was there for a couple of hours. And then I thought, okay, it's time to come home now. In the past, I would have ignored my body telling me, this has been fun, but let's go home now. And as a result of that, by ignoring it, staying an extra hour or two, by the time I got home, I would have been kind of frazzled. Whereas now I was like, actually, this feels really good to have had a really nice time with people and to go home still feeling good. So I hope I don't know if that's answered your question.
Yes, it has. And I just think it points out how important it is because most of us live our lives disconnected from our body, from our mind. We're not paying attention to what we need, even some of the most basic things. I remember one person I interviewed said, it starts with just when you're thirsty, have some water. Yeah. When you need to go to the bathroom, take a break and take a bathroom break. Yeah. Like just start with the really small things because we ignore virtually everything and we try and push down and ignore and run from everything that's uncomfortable because that feels like the best way, right? Like why feel it? Why deal with it? Why sit in it? But I'm taking a course by a positive psychology professor named Corey Muscara, and he talks about the importance of descending into discomfort. Yeah. Which sounds horrible because we all want to transcend. But most of us have all of these behaviors that are just a way of trying to run from the present moment. Yeah. And if you actually just take a moment to just feel the discomfort, you instantly feel lighter. And it's exhausting continually trying not to feel what you feel or trying to pretend that things in your life aren't going on that actually are things that you're bothered by or unhappy with or worried about relationships or, addictions and different things. And he talks about just meet the mess, invite it all in. You don't have to fix it. Just be like, hey, it's okay. Yeah. And then you're like, oh, I feel so much better. Okay. I don't have to keep running.
Yeah. And actually you've hit on something really important because there's a kind of little framework I use, which is SEE. So C, which is part of a little process that I developed, and the S stands for state. So just recognizing that like in any moment, in this moment right now, we can change our state by just pausing, taking a breath, kind of checking in with our body. And as I'm doing that right now, I'm noticing actually my feet weren't flat on the floor. They were slightly, my feet are on their toes. And so I just put my feet on the floor and I can feel my calves feel a little bit more relaxed. I can just check in with my body. I can just, sometimes when I do this with clients, they recognize they're kind of holding their shoulders up and they go, And I say, just check in with your, how does that feel? How do your shoulders feel right now? And they feel like, actually, I feel more relaxed. And so that's the first thing. We can change our state in a moment. We can breathe. We can just take, a coach who I kind of followed and worked with a while back said, if you haven't got time for a half-hour meditation, you can meditate for 1 minute. If you haven't got time for 1 minute, you can just take one breath. And actually just taking a breath, just checking our posture is, open. I was reading this book. I'm trying to remember the author, but he's a body worker and he talks about the fact that we often kind of lean forward, and sometimes I notice when I'm working with clients, actually, I'm kind of slightly leaning forward. I can sit back and I can open my chest. And when we do that, we know from research, it has an impact on our energy and on the hormones that the body releases simply by changing our posture. There's a study by Amy Cuddy, I think she's done a TED talk where she talks about adopting power postures and it decreases the cortisol level by 25%. And if we're in a stress posture, it increases the cortisol by 15%. So, that's a 40% benefit by shifting from a stress posture to an open, powerful posture. So that's the first thing. We can change our state in a moment. The next thing is we can engage with that part of us that we all have that is wise. We've all had moments where we've been faced with a challenge and we've responded in a resourceful way. It might be, we were dealing with a challenge ourselves, or it was a friend or family member, and we just responded in a resourceful way. And, I really advocate people remind themselves of that on a daily basis. There's a little technique I use to help people just connect to that part of them that is wise, that has the capacity. I created this acronym PACT, which was patience, acceptance, calm, compassion, trust. And then I kept adding letters, playfulness, pragmatism, presence. But, we can in the moment just be more present. We can be more patient with ourselves. We can be more accepting. And I love this thing that Byron Katie says, is that when we resist what is, we lose, but only 100% of the time. So for me, just learning to be more accepting. Okay, yeah, I did overdo it. I have pushed myself this week. That's okay. I'm still learning. So we can engage with that part of ourselves that is wise. It's like the blue sky. It's always there, but we're not always connected to it. And then we can embrace that part of us that sometimes does those feelings, behaviors that are not so resourceful. And I know I loved your interview with Helen where she talked about Warren the wanker. Is that right?
Yeah.
and for me, that just made me laugh so much. For me, it was like recognizing that I had this part of me that I called, one of the parts was Scared Simon. I used to be very anxious. I used to worry too much about what people thought. I'd worry that I'd upset people. I remember going on this exchange and I was about 18 and we were staying with this lovely, lovely family, this Dutch family. And I wrote them a letter afterwards saying, thanks very much. We had such a great time. But I was worried that I said something that might have upset you. And this guy, Hank, said to me, Simon, I don't even know what you're talking about. We had a lovely time. We really loved having you there. And this guy, Hank, sadly, he was killed in a car crash a year later. And it made me think, oh, my God, I was worrying about stuff that was non-existent. And this was a really precious experience, So that was a little kind of wake-up call for me that I had to stop, doing some of those patterns. As I say, I was probably a very neurotic person before I learned all this stuff. And I hope I've become less so now. So, we can embrace that part of us that does tend to worry, overthink, catastrophize. And so rather than it running away with the show, that we can just, like we would a scared child, we can take care of it and let it know that actually we've got this and we've got them and they don't have to do that behavior. And, again, my experience is when I learn to do that, I can feel this shift in my nervous system. And that helps that, my body's healing.
This is amazing. I want all of this embroidered on pillows. Just really explained incredibly well. I know when we were leading up to this interview and, chatting a bit back and forth, you talked about it was important for you to change your operating system or your OS from a fear OS to a trust OS. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So that, I kind of, if I think about computers, in our computer, we install certain systems. I've got, I can't even remember what OS I've got at the moment. I've got a Mac. But in the same way, what I recognized is that for a long time, I had installed a fear operating system. So I'd look at the world through a lens of fear, and whatever was happening, I remember even before I got ME, I'd go out and, with friends and stuff, and I'd come home and I was thinking, was I interesting enough? Was I funny enough? It was like worrying what people think. And I realized I needed to uninstall that operating system and install a trust operating system. And I realized, it's like, oh my God, I've spent so much time operating from fear. And installing the trust operating system, unfortunately, it wasn't just a hit the install button. It's something that I had to cultivate. I had to work on my mindset. I had to recognize when I was kind of in a fixed mindset where I think, oh, this is just the way I am. Even though at some level I didn't really believe that. I remember when I was 10, someone saying, oh, he's just an anxious person. And I was like, is that really true, that that's just the way we are? And that became a little quest to try and understand, is it possible to change? And I discovered that it is, that we can change our kind of the way we operate. And so installing that trust operating system, cultivating a growth mindset, which is I can learn. If there's something that I'm not very good at, I can learn. I can learn from other people. I can resource myself by, doing a course. I can work on my self-esteem so that actually my self-esteem is more robust. So I'm less worried about what other people think. So I'm less triggered by someone who disagrees with me. So yeah, that was kind of the process. And it's an ongoing process. There's still, I remember during COVID having, two friends and I would get together online every week. And we'd often get into heated discussions because we had very different views about health and COVID and how it was being managed, etc. And I realized again, I was thinking, I was getting quite triggered. Why am I getting triggered? Okay, it's, at some level, I'm judging myself. And actually, I had a conversation with my two friends, said, look, I think we could have this discussion without it getting quite so heated. We're just trying to, I'm wanting to understand your perspective, but I think we can have this discussion in a way that's less judgmental. And they were both like, yeah, I think you're right, And so it kind of changed the vibe a bit, because we did get a bit combative at one point. And so it became a much more constructive process. So, yeah, I'm still, learning about, how to refine that trust operating system, how to update that system. But that has been a massive shift for me to recognize that I can do that.
It's amazing. And you've clearly learned so much on this journey. And it sounds like it was this, solid line upward trajectory towards, where you are now. But I'm sure that wasn't the case. So were there times when you were really struggling? And when those came up, how did you move through those? What kept you going?
Yeah. So 3 things. One was my daughter. She was like 11 when I got chronic fatigue syndrome. But as I say, my health had been deteriorating over a period. So I kind of felt I was less available over a period of time. And me and her mum did split up. But, she was still a really important part of my life. And there were times when I was kind of very upset because I had to say, look, I can't see you. We'd planned to meet. And she was upset by that. And I was upset. But that kept me going. That kept me, thinking, I know there were times which were really dark and I just felt my life I don't feel like I've got a life at the moment. And sadly, when I was at, in a very low period, one of my friends committed suicide. He had ME. And I knew him before I had ME. And he would phone me up from the hospital saying, can you help? And I didn't know then how to help him. And that was, when I kind of learned all this stuff and realized actually, if I could go back in time, I think without being arrogant, that there are things that I could have shared that may have helped him. So that was something that drove me. So, my daughter, my friend Mark, who, left this planet, they were 2 things that really drove me. And that's one of my motivations for doing what I do and putting out lots of free content because I want to help people. And the other things that were more personal is I wanted to go to festivals again. My siblings were all going to, there's a big festival in UK called Glastonbury. It's a massive festival, about 200,000 people go. It's extraordinary. And I would watch it on telly. I couldn't go. They were there. And so that was one thing. I want to go to a festival. So when I kind of got better and went to a festival, for the first time, that was just like, oh my God, this is a dream. And I still go to festivals every year. And whenever I'm at a festival, I pause and I just take it all in and just kind of put out gratitude to the universe. I feel emotional actually just saying that because, at one point that was just a dream. And, at one point I wasn't even leaving the house. And the other thing I wanted to do is to play tennis again. And one thing I did do when I had Emmy at a certain point is I visualized playing a game of tennis every day. And at a certain point, I suddenly thought, actually, I'm visualizing I can win every point. So I started serving aces. I started serving brilliant backhand passing shots. My backhand wasn't very strong, but in my imagination, it could be as good as I like. The interesting thing is when I played tennis again, me and my sister played my nephew and his friend. Admittedly, they were only 12, but they were pretty good. But my serve was better than it had been before I got sick. It wasn't as powerful because I didn't have the strength yet, but it was more accurate. So they were the things that kind of kept me going.
Wow. I know you also mentioned that there's a quote that really inspired you on your journey. So yeah, what that is.
Yeah, so that's a quote by Goethe, which is whatever you can do or dream you can, do it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. And so that kind of ties back to the question you just asked me about what kept me going. What kept me going with those things. So I kept dreaming of doing those things. And, I've got a little fridge magnet, which is on my radiator in my bedroom still. And so I can see it when I'm lying in bed. And yeah, that did massively inspire me amongst many other quotes.
Oh, I love it. And as you mentioned, you do have resources and support for people who are going through these sorts of conditions. So what do you have available for there's far too many people out there that are still, navigating their way through this?
Yeah. So, I put a lot of content on my YouTube channel. So check that out. Also TikTok and Instagram. I created a course called Building Resilience. If people want a kind of step-by-step approach. And as I say, I've already also trained in the Mind-Body Reconnect, which is a really interesting approach, which kind of teaches people how to listen to your body, listen to your symptoms and emotions, because they are the signpost to the way forward. And the other thing I'm just starting again in the new year is doing resilience group coaching every fortnight. There's no charge for that. People are welcome to pay by donation, but there's no charge. That's happening twice a week, 2 different times. And it's just a way of, asking questions, getting some coaching and being part of a supportive community. And one of the things that people say is they kind of love the community because they discover that other people are dealing with the same kinds of issues that they're dealing with them. So I say loads of free resources if you want that, if you want to go a little bit further, that you've got those other options.
Incredible. And of course, all of this is linked in the description. So I really encourage people listening and watching to expand that and take a look. Whatever you can do to get a bit more Simon in your life, I think will be a good thing. I am so glad we've met. This has felt like a personal counseling session for me. So I'm going to have to send you a donation as well. But just so many insights and so much helpful stuff. Yeah, I just thank you. Thank you for being here.
You are welcome, Raelan, and no donation is necessary. Thank you for everything you do. You are a total inspiration. I'm so inspired by what you do, and I kind of look to you as being a kind of role model, and I feel I can still learn masses from you too.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. And this, for people watching, listening, if this is resonating, I'm going to link an interview I did recently with an amazing guy named Eric. And he also talked about his fear operating system and just explains really well for him, how he moved through that into a new way of being. So thank you to everyone who's watching, listening. I really appreciate you, wishing you well. Thank you again to Simon. And I hope to see all of you in this next interview with Eric.
You're welcome, Raelan.